Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we're ready to start our Torah reading discussion. This week's Torah portion is Pinchas, which is in the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar. And if you happen to be in the Blue Otzkel Chumash, like I am, the Torah portion is found on page 876. That's 876 in the Blue Otzkel Chumash. If not, it's let me see which number Torah portion it is in the book of Numbers. The 8th Torah portion in the book of Numbers. So we want to discuss this week's Torah portion, of course, which is Pinchas, very meaningful Torah portion. Again, every Torah portion is meaningful, but the reason I mention it is because there's a section of this week's Torah portion that is read more than any other Torah section of the entire Torah, and I'll explain in a moment, and has great relevance till this very day. So we'll get into that. I also want to mention that on Thursday, 2 days from now, we begin what is known as the 3 weeks, referred to the 3 weeks, the 21 days between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. 2 sad days on the Jewish calendar, both marked by fasts. Tisha B'Av is actually the only other fast that's 24 hours like Yom Kippur, marking the mourning and the destruction of our holy temple. So we want to talk about that as well, because it's starting on Thursday, and there's some practical aspects about it that we need to know, as well as some very important lessons that we have to practice during this time. But let us start with the portion of Pinchas. Before we get to the section that I said is very famous until this day, and practiced on a daily basis, which we'll explain, and as well as read more than any other section. Let's just start with the overarching story, which gives it the name of the Torah portion, which is Pinchas. So in order to understand the story of Pinchas, we have to go back to the end of last week's Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion was about a man by the name of Balak, who is the king of Moab. And Moab, let me just have a little drink of water. Balak was the king of Moab. He hired a Gentile prophet by the name of Bilam to come and curse the Jewish people. We know what the ending of the story was. Bilam was only able to utter blessings. Famously, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling place is Israel. But at the end of the portion, Bilam advises Balak that if you want to destroy the Jews, you have to engage them in sin. So let the daughters of Moab go out, entice, seduce the Jewish men, lead them to their idolatrous practices, and that will create a rift between God and the Jewish people. It will create a sin in the community that will cause God to turn away his favor from the Jewish people, and then the Jewish people will self-destruct. Ironically, we find till today that every enemy that has come up against the Jewish people has failed. Time and again, in every generation, in every civilization, the Jewish people have outlived and outlasted all their enemies. Reminds me of the story about a rabbi who gave a sermon, and he went on for an hour about the importance of forgiveness and peace. And then he said at the end of the sermon, anyone who's ready to forgive all his enemies, raise your hand. And about half the congregation raised their hands. So the rabbi went on for another 15 minutes about the importance of forgiveness. Then he said again, anyone who's ready to forgive all their enemies, raise their hand. Now 3/4 of the congregation went on. The rabbi continued for another 15 minutes. Now everyone in the congregation raised their hand, except one old guy. The rabbi said, we all want to go to Kiddush. Why are you holding us up? Well, how come you're so stubborn? Why don't you want to forgive your enemies? And the old man says, Rabbi, I'll tell you the truth. It's because I don't have any enemies. And the rabbi said, wow, come up here. He said, what's your name? He said, my name is Jack Goldberg. He said, how old are you? He says, I'm 103 years old. He said, you're 103. You lived 103 years old in this world. And you can tell me you don't have a single enemy? How could that be? And Jack says to the rabbi, because I outlived them all. So there's 2 ways to have no enemies. One is to not have any enemies, to be a peace-loving person. Another way is to outlive your enemies. We, the Jewish people, like that old man. We've outlived all our enemies. But while we have outlived all our enemies, there's one enemy we seem to be losing the battle against, and that is assimilation. We see today that more Jews have assimilated in our generation since the Holocaust, and we've lost more Jews to the spiritual Holocaust of assimilation than during the actual Holocaust. So what Moab was advised by Bilam was get the Jews to go with the Moabite women, and then they'll lead them to their gods and away from Judaism, and then the Jewish people will disappear on their own. However, there was a man by the name of Pinchas who stood up to stop this this behavior and this plague by attacking a leader from the tribe of Shimon, whose name was Zimri, who was engaging with a Moabite woman sexually by a woman by the name of Cosby. And he killed them to show that what this leader was doing, which was also setting an example for everyone else that is permissible, was wrong. And this brought the Jewish people to the realization that they've engaged in this licentious behavior and gone too far, and it was bringing the wrath of God upon the Jews. And this stemmed the plague. But now the Jewish people looked at Pinchas and said, what did you do? You murdered a leader of one of the tribes, a man by the name of Zimri. And had God not stepped in and spoken up, so to speak, and intervened, Zimri would have been charged with murder because he had no license to do this. He was a zealot. He did it on his own. He wasn't instructed. He didn't even ask permission for Moses. Moses, by the way, felt vulnerable in this area because he married a Midianite woman. And Zimri challenged, he was the leader of the tribe. He said, Moshe, you took a Midianite woman. Why can't I? Why can't everyone else? So they were legitimizing and condoning this behavior. So the beginning of the parsha speaks up with God saying, Pinchas, the son of Elazar, who is the grandson of Aaron the high priest, removed my wrath, turned back my wrath from against the Jewish people by zealously avenging my vengeance among them. So I do not consume the children of Israel in my vengeance. And therefore he's going to get an award. He's going to get a prize. What is the reward he gets? He gets the kuhuna, the priesthood. Up until then, only Aaron and his descendants were made kohanim and future descendants, but not anyone born before Aaron was given the gift of priesthood. So Pinchas would have been excluded from the priesthood, but now he's included in the priesthood for him and his descendants. Why? Because God says, I'm giving him the covenant of peace. Kohen is a man who is a lover of peace, like Aaron. That's why the Torah traces his lineage back to Aaron. And therefore, he showed that he's a man of peace. Why? Because he's creating peace between man and God, the Jewish people and Hashem, restoring that peace between heaven and earth. And therefore, he and his descendants will be granted the kuhuna, the priesthood, for all future descendants, which is the trademark of the Kohanim. As it says in Pirkei Avot, be a disciple of Aaron, love peace, pursue peace, He loved peace, he pursued peace, loved mankind, and brought them closer to the Torah. It's not enough to love mankind. You actually have to bring them closer to the Torah, which means you have to draw the Jewish people closer to God, make peace between heaven and earth. That is the overarching story of the parsha, the story of Pinchas, which is a remarkable story, a story that has a lot of discussion about zealotry, taking the law into your own hand, when is it permissible, and how sometimes the zealot may seem like he's a person of vengeance, a person of brutality, a person of, he could be accused, like the Jews were accusing Pinchas of being a man of aggression. But the Torah says, no, he's not a man of aggression, he's a man of peace. And this is a long discussion that we could touch upon briefly, maybe get back to later, that basically things aren't always what they seem to be. Sometimes the man of peace, who seemingly is very loving, is actually a man who unfortunately has misguided kindness. And misguided kindness could lead to evil and brutality. So a judge that says, oh, I feel bad for this criminal, I'm just going to let him go free. He may think he's doing an act of kindness, but that criminal is now going to go out and kill an innocent person. So what the judge did was cloaked in compassion and kindness, but really it was an act of evil, an act of cruelty towards the innocent person that will be killed because this judge was too lenient on this offender. On the other hand, a person could act as though they're being disciplined and they're showing harshness or restrictions and being cold-hearted, so to speak, but they're actually doing an act of compassion. So if your child wants to do something that's dangerous and you say no, and the child says, why aren't you more kind, compassionate? I want to do this dangerous sport, or I want to play with this dangerous whatever it may be, fireworks on July 4th. Your 10-year-old kid wants to shoot off fireworks, and you're strict. You say, no, go to your room. You're punished. You're not allowed to play with fireworks. You may think, oh, I'm being so harsh. I'm being so restrictive, but really you're being kind to the kid. You're being compassionate. So, and just to detour for 1 minute here, get a little bit Kabbalistic for just a few minutes here. We talked about the fact that Thursday begins the 3 weeks. And it's interesting that we call it 3 weeks. You know, we should call it one of the names is Bein HaMitzarim, the days between the straits, because we're in a very narrow space, like King David says, Min HaMeitzar, from my confinement, from my constraints, I call out to you. We're in a place of confinement, remembering the tzarot. The word tzarot, by the way, everyone knows the word I have, tsaris. Tsaris is the word tsar, narrow. You know, when sometimes you're in an expansive place, emotionally, physically, you feel expansive. Sometimes you're in a very confined, narrow space. You feel like the walls are coming in on you. You have problems. The roof is falling down on your head. You're in a confined cell, not physically, but emotionally as well. Sarot means I have things that are confining and restricting me. So the 3 weeks are called Bein HaMitzarim, between the narrow straits, like we're walking through a narrow space, remembering what happened to our ancestors, which our rabbis say every generation that the temple is not rebuilt, it's as though it was destroyed in that generation. So we continue to suffer the consequences of a world that's broken. That's why every wedding, under the chuppah, before we end the wedding ceremony, we break a glass to remember the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, to remember the world is broken. There's so much pain and suffering and hardship and misery in the world because the world is in a place of exile where God's light is not revealed. And when we pray for the building of the Beit HaMikdash, we're not praying for a physical building. We could go build it tomorrow. There are great architects that could design a holy temple. It's not about the building. It's about like being like a child being banished from their father's and mother's home and want to go back home to their parents. We want to be back with God's presence. We want to feel God's presence in the world. We don't want to live in a world that's devoid of God's presence, where there's room for so much evil and sadness and tragedy. But why is it that it's referred to many as the 3 weeks? It seems like inconsequential detail. 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 21 days. Why 3 weeks? So Kabbalah explains the significance of the number 3. But here I'm going to tell you something very interesting. And I don't want to get into a political subject, and I'm not trying to. But, you know, we always hear in our country, especially today more than ever, the left and the right. You know, right and left. And what does right and left mean in America? Right means you're conservative. Left means you're liberal. Now, without getting political, what do people associate conservatism with? And what do people associate liberalism with? So there's the famous quote, I forgot who said it. And again, I'm not getting political, but just there's a famous adage that says if you're 20 and you're not a liberal, it means you don't have a heart. If you're 40 and you're not a conservative, it means you don't have a brain. What is this adage implying? Liberalism is about compassion. You know, the liberals care about the poor and the black and the underprivileged, and so, you know, they want all the social welfare programs, help others, help others, help others. And conservatives are portrayed as being less compassionate, being more about harshness or discipline or restrictiveness. You know, so right and left. And by the way, right and left is nothing new. My name is Moshe. The Megala Amukas, one of the great rabbis, says that Moshe is an acronym for Machloket, Shammai, and Hillel. Mem Shin He. Machloket, Shammai. The disputes between Hillel and Shammai, which is on every other page of the Talmud. Hillel was, quote unquote, more liberal. He always took the more lenient view. Shammai was a more conservative person, always took a stricter rule. And that's their fault line, where they always argue. In most cases, we rule like Hillel, actually. That's why there's Hillels on universities, right? Because Hillel's the popular guy. Shammai is not followed because he's too strict, he's too harsh. It says when Mashiach will come, we'll live in a more perfect world, we could follow the rulings of Shammai. But the idea is that there are souls that are more rooted in Hillel, more open. Now, again, Hillel was a halachic rabbi who followed Jewish law to the letter of the law. He wasn't like just, oh, let's do whatever we want. But within Jewish law, he found a more lenient approach. So right and left in America, going back to America, means strict versus lenient. But here's the amazing thing. In Judaism, we also have right and left. So the right in Kabbalah represents chesed, kindness. Left represents strictness, discipline. That's why King Solomon says when you discipline a child, you should use both hands. Yamin mikarev is draw the child closer with the right hand. Smol dochem, push the child away, meaning rebuke the child with the left hand. You can't just show kindness. You can't just show strictness. You have to use both hands. The dominant hand is the love you show the child, yamin. But you also need to discipline the child, rebuke the child with the left hand. If you pull with the right hand and push with the left hand, you turn the child around. The way to change someone is using both hands. But the amazing thing is that right represents love and compassion. Left represents strictness and harshness and discipline, restrictiveness, rules. The opposite of our society. In our society, the people on the right are the stricter people, so to speak. They want strict law and order, discipline. The people on the left are more liberal. Let's have more compassion, right? Why is it opposite in Judaism? And the reason is because Judaism is saying is that we need all to have balance in our lives. That's the third attribute. Chesed is kindness. Gevura is number 2, strength, discipline, restriction. And then you have Tiferet, which is harmony and beauty. Beauty is when you have multiple colors coming together, when you balance your kindness and your strength. That's when people say, are you right or you're left? We shouldn't be either. We should be number 3, Tiferet, the harmonization of both, knowing when to show love and compassion, when to show discipline, and how to balance the two together. So we refer to it as the 3 weeks because we're emphasizing the number 3. That the temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. You see, all the hatred we see in society is nothing new. Right, left, you, me, others, right? Stop talking about others. Talk about brothers. We're not others. We're brothers and sisters. And therefore, we have to learn to not have misguided kindness, because misguided kindness could be cruelty. On the other hand, not to have misguided discipline and strength, because unfortunately, that could also be detrimental. But rather have the third path, which is the blending and the combination of knowing how to use both simultaneously and when to use one and when to use the other. And so Tiferet would be a person who's independent. I'm not locked into this. I'm not locked into that. I'm not restricted in either one. I am the blending Tiferet of 2. And how do we heal the rifts amongst the Jewish people? Because that's what the 3 weeks about. The temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. The way it will be repaired is because of, our rabbis say, unconditional baseless love, by learning how we do the 3 weeks, when to use chesed, when to use gevura, and when to use teferis, which is the balance of both. That is the harmonization. And by the way, you know what teferet is also referred to as? It's referred to as rachamim, compassion, because kindness is for the person I love. Strength and restrictiveness is against the person I don't love. Teferet is, you know what? There's no one I don't love. Some people I love because they're good. Some people, maybe it's hard to love them because they're not so good, but I have rachamim, I have mercy and compassion. Instead of having anger towards that person, I feel sorry for that person. So I could go to a jail as a rabbi, and I see Roseanne Sahayek is on. I know she visited jails for women, right? And you see people who have made terrible mistakes and even done evil, whether it's theft or even, God forbid, violence or even murder or rape. I've been to hardcore criminals where people are serving 25 years to life. How do I relate to this human being? Do I love them for who they are? Well, they've done pretty bad things. It's hard to love a person who murdered somebody. Do I turn my face away from them and say, I don't want to talk to you? Gevura, strength, punish you? No. I visit them in prison and share with them the message of Torah and the joy of the holiday. Why? Because I have rachamim, I have mercy and compassion on them. I have rachmanis. I say, for whatever reason, whether their own emotional problems or their family upbringing or their whatever it is, life led them in a very dark and horrible place. And all I could do is have the blending of chesed and gevura. They have to be in jail. They have to experience punishment. At the same time, I have to do it with kindness, which is rachamim, mercy on every soul, on every human being. And I don't judge a person until I'm in their shoes. So that is the lesson of the 3 weeks. If you can't love someone because you're disappointed in the way they are or act, you could always show rachamim, mercy. Even as you show discipline, you could show rachamim. Tell you a story. And in the olden days, today we don't have these problems. In the Tsar's army, Jewish kids were conscripted, and it was a life of misery and detachment from Judaism. So there was this kid who went totally off the Jewish path, and he went to his rabbi for a blessing. They shouldn't get conscripted in the Jewish army. He's now a young man. He's going to be taken to the Tsar's army. The rabbi hadn't seen him since before his bar mitzvah, and the rabbi said to him, "How are you?" "I'm doing well, thank God." "How's Judaism with you?" He says, "I don't really observe much." He says, "Do you still keep Shabbat?" He says, "I stopped keeping Shabbat." "Do you eat kosher?" "No, I don't eat kosher." "Do you put on your tefillin?" "No, I don't put on my tefillin." Finally, the rabbi says, "I give you a blessing that when you go to the Russian army, to the office of recruitment, they should be as disappointed in you as I am." What he was doing was he was blessing him not to get conscripted, but at the same time telling him, "I'm disappointed." That's admonishing with love, with compassion. I still love you. I still give you the blessing, but I want you to know I'm hurt. I'm disappointed that you strayed from Judaism. The point is, this is the 3 weeks message, really, in a nutshell. The antithesis of baseless hatred, which brought to the destruction of the temple. And you may say, what do you mean baseless hatred? Nobody hates anyone for no reason. Ask anyone who hates someone. Why do you hate them? They'll give you reasons. And the rabbis are saying it's baseless. There's no reason to hate another person. You could have pity on a person. You could feel sorry for a person. You could try to help a person. But why would you hate somebody? So that's the 3 weeks. Now let's go back to the opening discussion of Pinchas. Pinchas gets the Medal of Honor. What's his reward? He gets the covenant of peace. Hineni notein lo et briti shalom. Now this is so ironic. Here's a man that took a dagger, ran it through the leader of the tribe of Shimon, one of the leaders of the 12 tribes, Zimri, and a princess of Midian. She wasn't just an ordinary girl. She was a princess. Her name was Cosby, and murdered them before the eyes of all of Israel. And you may think, he'll go to jail or be convicted of murder, or at least he'll be considered an aggressor, a vigilante, a violent man. No, he gets the covenant of peace. How does this man become a covenant of peace? And I don't want to get political again with Israeli politics, but you have the Peace Now movement. And then they're called the lefties, as we said, right? And then the righties are people who are portrayed as being anti-peace. Let me tell you right now, there isn't a normal Jew in Israel. Again, there may be abnormal people, but normal people want peace. The most right person says, there's nothing I would pray for more than peace in Israel. Every Israeli has to send their son and daughter off to fight in the army at 18 or 19. And for 2-3 years, they don't sleep at night because they don't know if their child's in Gaza or in the West Bank or doing a raid. And when, God forbid, they're going to get a phone call or a car will come up to tell them, God forbid, that something happens to their beloved child. No one wants peace more than the Jewish people. Every day in our prayers, open up your Siddur and you will see that the prayer that's recited more than anything else is Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. The priestly blessing ends with Shalom. The Shemona Esrei ends with Sim Shalom. Everything is about peace in Judaism. People who don't want to make peace accords with the Arabs are saying peace will lead to more death and destruction, like the Oslo Accords led to bombings and cafes and buses. It's just the question is how you get to peace. But everyone wants peace. Don't think that only the people who say, let's make peace want peace. Everyone wants peace. The question is there another party willing to make peace with us? That's the question. Or have they reformed? Have they changed their suicidal ways and their death chants to Israel? That's the question. But everyone wants peace. So Pinchas gets the award of Shalom. He's the most unlikely person to be given the peace merit, the covenant of peace. But why did he get the covenant of peace? Because he brought peace amongst the Jewish people and between man and God. He brought peace, reconciliation, love back between God and the Jewish people. As the Jewish people were straying, the peace between God and the Jewish people was being disturbed. So there's a marriage between God and the Jewish people. And when the Jewish people sin, just like if a spouse is unfaithful in a marriage, there's no shalom bayis, there's no peace in the house. Because if you are unfaithful to me, how can I be in a loving relationship with you? When the Jewish people are unfaithful to God and they go after the Moabite women and they worship the Baal Peor, which was the idol, By the way, something fascinating. If you look at the end of the Torah, when Moshe dies, it says God told him to go up to Mount Nebo, and he will die there. And the Torah tells us a clue that Mount Nebo was opposite the idol of Baal Peor, this idol that the Moabite women attracted the Jewish men to. Representing that Moses was the antithesis. What he represented is faith in one God, the opposite of, God forbid, worshiping Baal Peor. Moshe brought Jews in contact and connection, in relationship, in union with Hashem. Baal Peor was to take Jews away from God, just like assimilation does today. Pinchas restored the harmony. And again, think of a marriage. One of the greatest mitzvot you can do, it says in the daily prayers, bring peace between a husband and a wife. Between God and the Jewish people is like a relationship between us and Hashem. And that's what Pinchas restored. The relationship created harmony and peace between us and Hashem. So now we go to what I've been telling you about, the section of this week's Torah portion that is very fundamental. And I'll start with a little interesting tidbit. A Torah scroll is written by a scribe, letter by letter. It takes about a year to write a Torah scroll by hand. It's fascinating. It's the only book I know of today in 2020 that's written by hand. Today we have printing presses, we have computers, we have files, digital. Who sits and writes a book? Not just one book, but 5 books of Moses. It's a year of work. That's why a Torah scroll usually costs between $30,000 and $40,000, because it's a man's salary for a year, letter by letter. We don't print it, and that's a separate discussion. Why it still has to be, why we have to still write it by hand till this very day. But when you look at a Torah scroll, every once in a while you have to check it to make sure it's still kosher, because sometimes the letters could get erased, they could get fractured, they could get broken. And if one letter is not intact, the entire Torah is invalid. Fascinating message that every letter is like a Jew in the Torah. Every Jew completes the nation of Israel. So if I bring a Torah scroll to a sofer and I say, could you check this Torah scroll to see if it's kosher? Well, if he has to read the whole Torah from beginning to end, it'll take him weeks, maybe months. I don't know. It's a long job. So there's a way to spot check a Torah. What's the way to spot check a Torah? Every scribe knows this trick. Okay, you turn to this week's Torah portion. Why? Because in the heart of this week's Torah portion is the laws of all the sacrifices. In the temple, before we had prayer, we had offerings, sacrifices. And I don't want to get into the subject of sacrifices. That's another whole lengthy subject. But the sacrifices, every Shabbat, every day we pray 3 prayers. Shacharit, Mincha, Ma'ariv, 3 opportunities for prayer. However, on Shabbat, there's a 4th prayer, which is Musaf, the additional prayer. It's all about the Shabbat offerings, the sacrifices in the temple. Now, every holiday had its sacrifices. Every day had its sacrifices. So what we do is every single holiday, we take out a second Torah, as you see in the synagogue, and we read, in addition to the regular reading, an additional reading about that day's offerings in the temple in ancient times. So therefore, the section that is read more than any other section of the Torah is this week's Torah portion, because we read it on multiple holidays. So if there's any section of the Torah that would be getting, quote unquote, wear and tear, it would be this week's Torah portion, because it's read so continuously. And therefore, if there would be a faulty letter, it would be found in this week's Torah. So if he checks this week's Torah portion and all the letters look good, he could have safely assumed that the rest of the Torah is in good shape. Because if the section that's used most is in good condition, surely the rest of the Torah is in good condition. So there are many sacrifices for many different holidays. And the Musaf prayer on Shabbat and every holiday talks about that holiday's particular unique sacrifices. Without getting into the idea of sacrifices, let's talk about the idea of sacrifice. Sacrifice means a giving of yourself. So we may not bring animals as a sacrifice today, but we all understand the significance of making sacrifices, whether for God, for our family, for our spouse, for our children, for our parents, for our siblings, for our friends, for our community, for our cousin, right? The world, in a way, revolves around sacrifices, being one person being willing to give of themselves for another human being. That's what relationships and friendships and love is all about. So this week's Torah portion is very relevant and very crucial and very critical. But let's try to unpack it a little bit and relate it to our lives. So today we know that we have 3 daily prayers, as I mentioned. There's the morning, the afternoon, and the evening prayer. Now, evening prayer is an add-on. What do I mean by an add-on? It's a voluntary prayer. Today it became customary, so it's standard. Arvit is now part of the cycle of 3 daily prayers, and today it's not voluntary anymore because the Jewish people accepted it as a norm. But initially there were only 2 daily prayers, morning and afternoon. Why 2? Why not like the Arabs who pray 5 times a day, or like others maybe that pray once a day? Because in the temple there were 2 daily offerings. Besides the special sacrifices for Shabbat and for holidays, there was a morning and afternoon offering, which was a communal sacrifice. All the Jews contributed towards it, and it was brought on behalf of the whole community. So once the temple was destroyed and Jews went into exile, the rabbis instituted prayer as a substitute for the offerings that were brought in the temple. So instead of one communal prayer, we each do our individual prayer, part of the communal prayer, which is in the synagogue. That's why we ideally go to the Bet Knesset, to the house of gathering, the communal space, to pray and offer the offerings together. So every morning and every afternoon, there was 1 lamb in the morning, 1 lamb in the afternoon. That's what the Torah tells us. Now, for beginners, let's explain the following. The Talmud relates the discussion between 3 rabbis. Actually 4 rabbis. What's the most important verse in the Torah? So one rabbi says the most important verse. It's an interesting question. I don't know if you ever thought about this. Someone says to you, what's the most important verse in the Torah? Everyone can have their verse that they love the most. You're entitled to love your own verse. Because every soul connects to a different mitzvah or a different, the Talmud talks about what is the area that your soul shines the most? Everyone has their mitzvah that they love the most. But these 4 rabbis discuss what's the most important mitzvah or the most important verse. So Rabbi number 1 says the most important verse is, let us make man in our image, meaning to say that every human being is in the image of God. And you could understand how that's the most important verse because the dignity of every human being in God's image. That's one opinion. Second opinion says, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the most important verse. Third rabbi says, hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. Okay, faith in God. But then there's a 4th rabbi, his name is Ben Pazi. And he says, you know what the most important verse in the Torah is? This week's Torah portion, Pinchas. You shall bring 1 lamb in the morning and 1 lamb in the afternoon. You should bring a second offering in the afternoon. That's the most important verse. And the commentaries say, how could that be the most important verse? I can understand every human being in the image of God, the dignity, like the Declaration of Independence says, all men are created equal. That's the most important verse. Great, they took it from the Torah. Here is what the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Faith in one God, monotheism, or love your neighbor as yourself. I can understand how these are contenders for top verse of the Torah. But how does 1 lamb in the morning, 1 lamb in the afternoon even compete against those 3 big verses? And one of the explanations is that it's not, Ben Pazi is not competing with other verses. What he's saying is that it's not enough to believe in the dignity of every human being in the image of God. It's not enough to have faith in one God. It's not enough to love your neighbor as yourself. You have to make 1 offering in the morning, 1 offering in the afternoon. Meaning you got to practice these values. You have to implement them. You have to do something tangible to make an offering of yourself, to give of yourself for your fellow man, to give of yourself for your faith in God, to give of yourself, to make an offering. It could be 1 lamb in the morning, 1 lamb in the afternoon, but Judaism is all about mitzvot, taking the greatest ideals and values and making sure that we're practicing it, that we're giving tzedakah, that we're acting on our faith in God. I always am impressed with the fact that every piece of currency in America says, in God we trust. We're a God-fearing nation. At least that's what our currency says. But when you look outside the window and you look at behavior of mankind, does it look like we're a nation that practices in God we trust? So I see some of you shaking your head no, right? We believe it. It's on every penny, nickel, quarter, dime, dollar, $100 bill. In God we trust. God bless America. God, God, God. If you take a poll, 80-something% of Americans say we believe in God. But what percent of Americans act like there is a God, looking down upon them, watching over their actions? That's a whole different story. It's easy to believe in something. The Talmud takes it so far. The Talmud says that there is a thief who before he burglarizes his home, before he breaks in to steal, he says a prayer to God. God, please help me that I shouldn't get caught. And what the Talmud's pointing out is the complexity and the contradiction of human nature. Here's a guy's about to burglarize a home. 10 Commandments says, you shall not steal. At the same time, he's praying to God to not get caught. 1 minute, do you believe in God or not? If you don't believe in God, then why are you praying to him? If you do believe in God, why are you stealing? The answer is, I sort of believe in God. It's an idea that whatever, I relate to it. It gives me some hope or comfort. But do I really believe in God to the sense that God is watching me and telling me not to steal? And he'll provide food for me without stealing livelihood in an honest way? No. So faith could be superficial, external, doesn't have to permeate your being. Mitzvot is about taking the values of Judaism and making sure that you don't just, the thief believes in God on some level, or else he wouldn't be wasting his time praying. It's not that he doesn't believe in God, it's just that it's a very superficial faith. You have to permeate your being with that faith, that it affects your actions, your deeds. So this is the whole message of one lamb in the morning, one lamb in the afternoon, that we have to implement what we believe in. And that's why Ben Pasi says it's not enough to say, I love my neighbor as myself, I have faith in one God, or I believe in the dignity of every human being. I must act on it more, not just once a day, but morning and evening. But I want to look at the way the Torah describes this morning and afternoon offering. It's chapter 28 of the book of Numbers. Hashem spoke to Moses saying, command the children of Israel, say to them, my offering, and here's the key word here, my food for my fires, my satisfying aroma, you shall be scrupulous to offer to me in its appointed time. So, and then the Torah says, this is a fire offering that you're to offer to Hashem, male lambs in the first year, unblemished, 2 a day, as a continual elevation. Now, there's 2 points that I want to observe in this verse. The first point is that the Torah says that it's my food for my fires. Now, what does it mean it's my food? God doesn't have a body and he doesn't eat food. So why are these offerings considered food? The second point is it's an elevation offering. Now, there are various types of sacrifices. And again, for us today, this is all metaphoric because we don't have offerings. But there were sacrifices in the temple where the Jew brought a sacrifice, and part of the sacrifice was burnt on the altar, part was eaten by the Jew who brought the offering, and part was eaten by the Kohen. So everyone got a piece of the pie, as they say. But then there was an elevation offering where the entire animal was consumed on the altar. Nothing for the individual who bought it, and nothing for the Kohen. And these unblemished lambs, morning and evening, was completely consumed. Now, on a practical level, in the olden days, you didn't write a check or swipe your credit card for charity. You gave one of your animals away to God. It was a way of making a sacrifice. But what are these 2 ideas that it's God's food? And what is the idea that it's an elevation offering? Why couldn't it be an offering that everyone gets to eat a little bit of the meat like most sacrifices? Why wasn't it in the category of elevation offering? And how does this all apply to our lives today when we don't have animal sacrifices? And why is the sacrifices brought morning and evening, right before the evening? And by the way, the reason there was an evening service is because you were allowed to eat the evening service throughout the night. So that corresponds to the Ma'ariv service. But why morning and evening? So that's the third question. And with prayer today, how does it substitute for this? So let's start with question number 1, which is the idea that it's God's food. What does it mean that it's God's food? So let's think about what food does. Food, God made the world in a way, okay, that in order to stay alive, you have to eat food. And I'm including drink in food. What does food do? Food keeps the body and the soul attached to each other. God forbid if a person goes without food for a while, the soul will leave the body and the body will die. To keep body and soul together, you need food. Now, just like your own body is kept together by food and drink, sustenance, what keeps God's soul? God is the cosmic soul of the universe. The world is the body of God, so to speak, and God is the soul. Just like when you look in the mirror, you don't see your soul, but you know there's a soul because you're alive. Your heart is beating, your brain is working, your body is functioning. So too, we look at the world, we see a physical world, like a physical body. But just like the soul is enclosed in my body, God is the soul of the universe. He's enclosed in the world. How do we know God is in the world? Because the sun rose this morning, and it rose exactly on sunrise time. And it never slows down. I can tell you when sunrise will be in 100 years from now. How do I know it's not going to weaken by 5 minutes or by 25 minutes? All physical things slow down. I have a watch here. Can I tell you what time it's going to be at this time in 30 years from now? No, it's probably going to break or slow down. The world never slows down. Everything rotates perfectly. Well, there must be a supernatural force at play. So what keeps the soul, which is God, attached to the body? So just like food keeps the soul and the body attached in our physical beings, what God's saying is, this is my food. When we make sacrifices for God, for one another, when we give of ourselves, when we do a mitzvah, that's like the food of God. It doesn't mean that God ate breakfast or dinner. It means that God got sustenance. He got a good aroma, which means pleasure from seeing our good deeds, but not just a good aroma. You can't live on good aromas. You need food. The food is the offerings. The more we offer, the more we sacrifice, the more God has sustenance. And God says, I need daily food, just like we have to eat. Today we eat 3 meals a day, but there are those who say it's better to eat 2 meals a day. In the olden days, they ate 2 meals a day, maybe. So today, maybe we have too much abundance. We're overeating, perhaps. But God says, I need 2 meals a day. Today, we have 3 offerings. Shachris, Mincha, Erev, like the 3 meals. You eat 3 times a day, you pray 3 times a day, right? But the idea is that God needs to keep the body and the soul attached, which is the world and God's presence. And we do that through the offerings. So that's the number one. But here we come to something fascinating. I explained there's 2 different types of offerings. There is offerings where I get to eat some of the sacrifice, and some of it goes to God on the altar, or to the Kohen, who's the representative of God. And then there's the offering that's completely consumed. And here we have 2 different types of sacrifices. We all know what the word sacrifice means. We've all made sacrifices in our lives. We all believe in sacrifice, right? But we have to distinguish between 2 different types of sacrifices. And that is what we would call the self-motivated sacrifice or unconditional sacrifice. What does that mean? They are sacrifices we make for others, but it's self-motivated sacrifice. So even a typical sacrifice that a husband makes for a wife, or a wife makes for a husband in a loving marriage. Yes, I'm sacrificing for you. But really, it's a 2-way relationship. I sacrifice for you today, and tomorrow you'll sacrifice for me. Or yesterday you sacrificed for me. And to maintain this mutual loving relationship, we sacrifice for each other. And it's not like I get nothing in return. I get your love, I get your affection, I get your attention, I get your admiration, I get your love. What could be greater reward than my sacrifice? Your appreciation. So a husband goes, he buys his wife a beautiful piece of jewelry. Would you call that a sacrifice? Because he took money out of his bank account to buy his wife a nice piece of jewelry. It's a beautiful gesture, but he's going to get back a lot of love and appreciation for it. Sacrifice is when you write a check to a homeless person or to some poor person you never met, and you're getting nothing back in return. You're purely sacrificing to give this person. I had a great grandfather on my wife's side. His name was Mayor Simcha Chain. He was a wealthy man in Russia. They tell a story that he once came to the furniture store. He needed to buy a couch. And he said, show me the most expensive couch you have. Well, he was a rich man. They showed him the most expensive couch. He said, how much is it? They told him. He says, now show me the cheapest couch in the store. They were shocked. Why would a rich man buy an inexpensive couch? He showed him the least expensive couch. He said, give me the least expensive couch. They were surprised. Why is he buying the least expensive couch? But then he went and he took the difference between the least expensive and the most expensive couch, and he gave it away to charity. That was why he wanted to know the difference in the price. That's a sacrifice. When I give away for someone else completely, I give up something. I'm going to sit on a less comfortable couch for the benefit of helping another person. So we all know there is self-motivated sacrifice, and then there is unconditional sacrifice. When you do something for someone that they don't even know you did it for them, That's completely selfless sacrifice. They're never going to know. They're never going to thank you, so on and so forth. I love to tell the story about the man who comes into the restaurant and he wants to order fish. He says, I love fish. Do you have any fish? They said, we got great salmon. The waiter goes back, tells the chef, guy on table number 6 loves salmon. Could you give him a fresh salmon? He says, yeah. In this particular restaurant, they had a fresh fish tank. They took out a salmon, put it on the block, killed it, hit it over the head with a wooden stick. The brains of the fish went splattering with the blood, cut it up, put on a frying pan with oil and onions sizzling, threw the fish in. And the waiter said to himself, mumbled under his breath, that's a pretty cruel thing to do to a fish that you love. When someone says, I love fish, they don't mean they love the fish. If you love the fish, you let it swim in the ocean. That's love. When you kill the fish and eat the fish, you love yourself. You love the taste in your mouth of the taste buds and your stomach satisfaction of eating fish. Some people think of love as what I get out of this relationship, the pleasure I get, the enjoyment. And you could take that into marriage. I love the part of you that enriches me, not physically with food, but emotionally, even physical pleasure, whatever it may be. Someone pointed out that the greatest mitzvah is taking care of the deceased because they can never thank you or pay you back. It's a pure gift. So in our society, think of a soldier who goes to the battlefront, he dies for his country. No one really knows his name. Nobody thanks him. He gave his ultimate gift. For what? For others. That's what we should think about. Came from July 4th, sacrifice for our country, right? That is, so therefore the Torah says like this, that what kind of an offering is the bread of God? Not the sacrifice that is one that everyone benefits from. That's nice. But the olah, the elevation offering, the offering in which it is completely altruistic for the sake of God or for the sake of our fellow man, where I'm not looking out, I may reap a benefit because look, when you do a mitzvah, you feel good about yourself. You feel happier, no question. But it's an indirect consequence, not something you're seeking. And I say, I'm going to go help a poor person so I can feel good about myself today. No, I want to help a poor person. And now I feel good about myself. That's life. You do a good deed, you feel good, no question. But I'm not seeking anything in return. I'm doing it pure. And here we come to the third point. The first point is that God lives on our offerings, our sacrifices, when we give of ourselves. B, it has to be altruistic. It has to be unconditional sacrifice, not for something in return. The third thing is morning and evening. Morning and evening is a metaphor for the bright times of our lives and the difficult, dark times of our lives. Everyone goes through bright moments and dark times in our lives, challenging times, whether it's health, whether it's livelihood, whether it's family challenges, interpersonal relationship challenges. We all know that the world is filled with, there are periods of time that are difficult, like the pandemic we're going through. And God says, I need you to offer not just in the good times, not just, oh, life is perfect, God, let me make an offering to you, or let me make an offering to my fellow man. But when I'm struggling myself, I can't help other people. I can't make sacrifices. Torah says the offerings have to be by day and by night. And God says it's my food. You see, by God saying it's the food is a very powerful lesson. The lesson is, if you don't feed someone, they're going to die. You're starving someone. God says, without your offerings, I'm going to starve. I need you to make an offering. And therefore, if your kid is hungry and you're going through a bad day, you can say, listen, kid, I can't feed you today because I'm having a hard day. If you're a mother and your 2-year-old needs to eat, it doesn't matter if you're in a good mood or not. You know you have to feed your child. The same thing with feeding Hashem. Hashem says, I need my food. And then you may be having a rotten day and you feel lousy. You say, I have no time or energy or mental space to help another person now. Catch me on a good day and I'll help you out. Torah says morning and evening, metaphorically, good times and bad times. Maybe going through a hard time financially. Doesn't mean you can't help somebody else. There's always, as they say, I love to tell this story too. One of the founders of Birthright, one of the wealthiest Americans, he's worth about $20 billion, I think. His name is Sheldon Adelson. He owns the casinos in Vegas and big philanthropist, supporter of Israel, Zionist. And he said that he learned charity from his father. His father was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia. He drove a taxi. And he said that he would come home every day and he would come home with pockets full of cash because he was a taxi driver. In those days, there was no credit cards or Uber. And the first thing he would do is go to the blue and white box for Israel and stuff it with bills and coins. And he said, as a kid, he would look at his father, and he once said, Dad, we don't have enough food in our own house. Like, we're poor. Why are you giving away so much of your hard-earned money? And his father looked at him and said, Sheldon, always remember this in life. No matter what you have, there's always someone who has less than you. And therefore, no matter how difficult things are, there's someone who is less than you. And therefore, you must, in good days and in bad days, morning and evening, good times of your life and challenging times, think about others, make sacrifices for others. I love this story. I just told it a week or two ago, one of my videos, but I'll repeat it because it's so precious. And it goes like this. There was a man driving a Buick down the road, and a beautiful Ferrari passes him up. And he looks at the Ferrari and says, I wish I had a Ferrari. That would be such an amazing thing to drive a Ferrari. As he's thinking that, there's a guy walking on the sidewalk. A guy on the sidewalk riding a bicycle to work. And he looks at the Buick and he said, I wish I had an air-conditioned car with leather seats like that guy in the Buick. I have to go on my bicycle to work. It's hot. As the guy with the bicycle is envying the guy in the Buick, there's a guy getting on a city bus to get to work. And he looks at the guy in the bicycle and says, I wish I had enough money to buy a bicycle for a couple of $100. I have to schlep a city bus to get to work every day in the hot weather. I wish I had a bicycle. I wouldn't have to take 2-3 buses to get to work. As the guy's getting on the city bus thinking this, I wish I had a bicycle, there's a guy walking by who can't afford a bus pass. And he's thinking to himself, I wish I had money for a bus pass. I wouldn't have to walk 2 hours to work every day. And as the guy walking is envying the guy getting on the bus, there's a man sitting in his apartment in a wheelchair, and he's looking out the window and seeing the guy walking down the street and say, I wish I had legs that I could walk wherever I had to go and didn't have to get around in this wheelchair. We could look at people who have more than us and think, I wish. But there's no question, I promise you, there are people who look at you and say, I wish I had what you had. So there's always someone that you could make an offering to, make a sacrifice to. And that's the third message. Morning and evening, no matter what period of life we're going through, we always have to care about others. And finally, the last lesson, and that is prayer. Today we pray every day. What is prayer? Prayer is a combination. There are things we come to God. God, we ask you for livelihood. We ask you for health. That's like mutual offering. I'm coming to pray because I want things from God that I need. So therefore, I'm praying to Hashem to ask for what I need. But then there's the part of prayer where we just are surrendering ourselves to God. We're saying, God, we love you unconditionally. We're here to do your will. We're not asking for anything. It's not the part of prayer where we're asking for things for ourselves. We're just giving ourselves over to God like the complete elevation offering. We only have about 5 minutes left. So I just want to draw your attention to another amazing story in this week's Torah portion. The women in particular are going to like it because it's the first story in the Torah, or way before we had women's lib, we have women's rights in this week's Torah portion. And there's a lot more in this week's Torah portion. I recommend you read the whole Torah portion. But if you look at chapter 27, it tells the following. And I'll tell you the story and then a beautiful insight into the story. The story is about 5 girls. Their names is Machla, Noah, Chagla, Milka, and Tirza. 5 sisters. And they were all the daughters of a man by the name of Tzlafchad. And their father dies. And in the laws of inheritance, as was given over from God to Moses, only the male sons inherit, not the daughters. We won't get into that. It's a separate discussion because the men had a portion of the land of Israel. And therefore, if a daughter inherited, their portion would go over to the man she married, and their tribe's possessions would become smaller. But be that as it may, these girls are not getting an inheritance in the land of Israel. And they come to Moses and they say, our father died in the desert. And they say a few more things, which we'll discuss in a moment. And they say, we want to have an inheritance in our father's land. We want to inherit just because we're girls means we shouldn't get an inheritance in our father's possession. And Moses talks to God. He says, let me discuss this with Hashem. He comes back. He says, you're right. God agrees. You should inherit your father's portion. There was one condition. They had to marry members of their own tribe, so their land would not get transferred to other tribes and lose their ancestral land portion in Israel. So a lot of people say, wow, you see, women stood up for themselves for equal rights, and they got equal rights. So first of all, let me just tell you, our rabbis say that this is much more than women asking for equal rights. They were actually motivated by a love for the land of Israel. And again, we only have a few minutes. I'll just tell you that the clue is, it says the daughters of Tzlavchad, who was the son of Chefer, and they were the granddaughters of Gilad, the great-granddaughters of Machir, the great-great-granddaughters of Menashe, the great-great-great-great-granddaughters of Menashe, and their great-great-great, I don't know how many times back, of Joseph. Why does the Torah go back 6 generations? Chefer, Gilad, Machir, Menashe, and Yosef. 5 generations earlier than them, to trace their lineage to Joseph. What's the point? Usually you say so-and-so, the son of, or the daughter of so-and-so. Rabbis say Joseph loved the land of Israel. When he died, he had one request: take me to the land of Israel. None of the other 12 tribes asked to be taken to the land of Israel. That's right. Presumably, the other 12 tribes, the brothers, are buried in Egypt till today. One tribe member, Joseph, said, I want to go to Israel. He loved the land of Israel. They had that spiritual DNA that they inherited, a love of the land of Israel. They weren't motivated because they wanted real estate. We want a piece of our father's real estate empire. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the possessions. It was about having a land. We as girls want to own a piece of Israel. We want to have an inheritance in Israel. They were motivated by the desire to have a connection to the land of Israel. And by the way, another incidental fact that not everyone knows, but Rashi points it out in the counting of the tribes, the division of the land in this week's Torah portion. Rashi points out that the men died in the 40 years in the desert. The women, the girls didn't die because they were not part of the sin of the spies. They loved Israel. They were ready to go to Israel, and they lived and went to Eretz Yisrael. So the women who left Egypt made it into Israel. Only the men didn't make it in. So women in general loved the land of Israel, and these girls loved the land of Israel, these daughters, and they wanted a portion. They get a portion. But here's the note and the point that I would like to make. And that is, it's Rabbeinu Bachaya points this out. He says, Moses, this is at the end of 40 years in the desert. They're about to go to Israel, divide up the land, and they wanted a portion. By the way, Rebbe Youngbryce once said something about worrying. Someone said worrying is like a rocking chair. You go back and forth, but you don't get anywhere. So I remember Rebbe Youngbryce once pointed out in a shul that the word Slavcha, the father of these 5 daughters, is 2 words: Tzel Pachad, the shadow of worry. Why? She said, this man lived his whole life worrying. All my work for nothing. When I die, my daughters won't inherit me. Little did he know that his daughters would stand up, demand a portion, and get it. And all his worrying his whole life was for nothing. She said, sometimes we worry our whole lives about things that never come to be. We shouldn't worry. We should have more trust in Hashem. Tzel Pachat, Slavcha, living in the shadow of worry. Don't live in the shadow of worry. But going back here, they come to Moshe, and they ask this question. And it says that we want a portion in the land of our father. And the very next verse says, Vayakrev Moshe mishpatam lefnei Hashem. Moses brought their claim before God. Why did Moses go straight to God? Why didn't he first deliberate himself? He was the greatest teacher of Torah. He had been learning and teaching Torah for 40 years. He was at the pinnacle of greatness. Maybe he could have figured it out himself. Maybe if he couldn't find the answer himself, he could have gone to God. Why does he go straight to God? And the Rabbeinu Bachai says something amazing. He says, if you look back to the words of the daughters of Slavchad, verse 3 of chapter 27, they say, when they come before Moses, which was very courageous of them to stand up and come to Moses, they say, Avinu meit bamidbar, our father died in the desert. Vuhu lo heya betoch ha'edah hanoadim al Hashem badat Korach. He was not part of the rebellious congregation of the members who joined the camp of Korach to rebel against you, Moses. He died because of his own sin. And he had no sons, he only had daughters. What were they telling Moses? They were trying to win favor with Moses, right? They were saying to Moses, our father died in the desert. And he wasn't part of the Korach rebellion camp that we read about 2 weeks ago, right? Which happened 2 weeks ago in the Torah portion, but 39 years earlier, it happened in year 1 of the Jews in the desert. He wasn't part of the rebellion. Why were they bringing up that he wasn't part of the rebellion? They were trying to, so to speak, win favor with Moses. Our father was a good guy. He wasn't part of the troublemakers. He wasn't part of the congregants who made your life miserable in the congregation, Rabbi. He was a friend of yours. He was a supporter of yours. The minute Moses heard this, he disqualified himself from judging on this matter. He recused himself, as we would say, because he says, the minute someone said something to me that was flattering, oh, my father liked you, my clarity is not there anymore. I'm biased on this matter because have an inclination to rule in their favor because of the words of flattery they gave to me by saying, oh, our father was a supporter of yours. He wasn't part of Korach's team in rebelling against you. And therefore he says, I cannot answer this question. And Moses doesn't even attempt to figure out the answer. Rabbeinu Bachai says he goes straight to God because he knew that he could be the greatest human being, Moses, the greatest prophet that ever lived. He studied and taught Torah for 40 years. He's at the pinnacle of the height of his life. And he says, I'm still a human being who's susceptible to bribery and temptation. And the temptation of the bribe of, oh, you're a great leader, Moses. We love you. Our family loves you. Our family supported you during the rebellion against Korach. Our father was not part of the rebellion, would taint his vision and his perspective, and he could not see clearly, and therefore he disqualified himself, recused himself, and said, God, what's the ruling? I can't rule on this anymore. And here we see if the greatest human being ever, the holiest Jew, the greatest teacher of Torah, the greatest prophet, said, I'm still a human being who's susceptible to bias, and therefore I have to know and I have to step back. How much more so each and every one of us? And that's why it says in Pirkei Avot, Asel Harab, make for yourself a teacher. Why should you make for yourself a teacher? Because you need someone who's objective, who could give you clarity that you could ask a question from when you don't know what the answer is. You have to have the self-awareness to know when you're not able to see things clearly, and you need to ask someone objectively, who's right, who's wrong, what's the right path or the action or conduct I should take in this case, because maybe I'm being distorted in my view because of some gain or some motivation, some personal agenda that I may have, some particular bias that I may have. And therefore, a very fundamental lesson of the story of the daughters of Slavcha is know your limits, know when you need to seek advice and counsel. And I think there's a very relevant message we see today in our society, but also in our personal lives, that people take opinions and positions and refuse to see things from another person's perspective. And we're convinced sometimes that we're right, but maybe we have a personal bias or agenda that removes our clarity. And therefore, we always have to be open to hearing another person's perspective and examine ourselves, make sure that we're not taking a position out of a particular bias or self-interest or self-gain or self-motivation. And therefore, as it says in Pirkei Avot, I actually have it on my wall here. Someone once gave me this gift. It says, Aseh lecha Rav uknei lecha chaver. It's from Pirkei Avot. It says, make for yourself a teacher and appoint for yourself a friend. Why? Because every person needs a teacher and a friend, or many teachers and many friends. Someone that you could get an honest opinion from, an objective view, and say, am I seeing this clearly? What's your advice? Because even Moses wasn't ashamed to say, I may have been affected by their words of flattery or not flattery. Flattery would imply that it wasn't genuine. I'm assuming it was genuine what they said. But when somebody told me that their father was not part of the rebellion, I may be more inclined to rule in their favor because of their love for me and their kindness. And I have to rule this ruling objectively and honestly. And every one of us needs to be objective and honest in our views and be open to another person's perspective and realize when we're quote unquote out of our league because of personal self-interest and gain and bias, and seek advice and counsel from friends and teachers alike. So wish everyone a wonderful day. Thank you for joining our class, and have a beautiful week ahead. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Zoom program. Okay, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining. It's a pleasure to see each and every one of you. Have a wonderful day ahead. And today